Okay, I'm gonna spoil the first phase of the final boss of the DLC to show how strong this is. Just the first phase, but if you don't want to see that, skip to the time on screen right now. You got 3 seconds, 3, 2, 1. Ladies, gentlemen, and tarnished of all ages, how do you like the sound of going fast? Going very fast. So fast that you can never be hit, entering your final form and becoming a spinning top of absolute death and destruct. Today we're going to be using the Backhand Blades and some fun new armor and talismans to make a really strong general use build. The main idea here is that the Sprint R2 on this weapon type, like with the Sprint R1 on curved blades, has 4 weapon hits to the target that you hit with it. This means it is exceptional at applying statuses, so we add in a status, and then we also add in multi-hit talismans, because again, that's 4 hits really fast, because we're just hitting that in the blink of an eye, and then it all just hinges on the beautiful Backhand Blade exclusive Ash of War blind spot. What this does then is give you an absolute ton of iframes when you press the button, relocating you depending on your own movement input, so you have a choice of this, and then performing a relatively strong attack as a follow-up. Though the attack is by far not the star of this move, really, especially in the setup, it's much more the actual iframes that you get. What this allows us to do then is just be far more aggressive and find greater openings to actually do our sprinting attacks. It lets you get an attack in at the end of a combo when normally you'd have to do a standard dodge roll. By using this instead, it lets you dodge more dangerous timing attacks with this because it has more iframes in a dodge roll as well, which simply just have you a larger window of error than a standard roll for the trickier attacks in the game. Overall, this build isn't going to one-shot anything with a single input or anything like that. That's just not the point of it at all. The point is to make something that is so comfortable and generally powerfully consistent that it has no upward limitation. It is a build that requires a bit of skill to use for sure, but it is easier than average thanks to blind spot and focusing on sprint attacks. That said, let's break it all down, what each of these pieces are and where to get them so you can make this for yourself, with a caveat that I'll be assuming that you have, or at least have knowledge about all items involved that are from the base original game of Elden Ring. Then we'll go over where to spend your levels, and finally I'll go into a bit more detail on how to actually play this build. First up then, let's talk weapon. To make this work, there is only really a single weapon in the game that suits our needs, which is the base Backhand Blade weapon. There are 2 other Backhand Blade type weapons, but one of them has a unique skill, so that prevents blind spot from being used, and the other has a unique moveset that alters the sprint heavy attack and makes it do 2 hits instead of 4, so this sorta has to be the one. As for how to get it then, it is right in the opening gravesite plains area, just a very short hop northeast and right in front of this little grave right here on your map. These blades come with blind spot already on them, and you want to set them to keen affinity so that they scale highly with dexterity, as it is their best possible scaling stat, hitting a low S rank scaling at max upgrades. This is a paired weapon then, which means that you get 2 for the price of 1 weight-wise, and you can do the power stance moveset with the standard attack buttons while two-handing, which is what gets us our heavy multi-hit attack when sprinting. Next up, you need a sacred seal in your offhand. Technically any of them will do, but the one that scales best with our current stats is the Gravelstone Seal, and the fire damage part of Bloodflame Blade as an incantation scales with your incantation scaling, so that does actually matter, even if only a relatively small amount. Past that, for your helmet, you want the White Mask from the base game. This increases all damage that you deal by 10% for 20 seconds after a bleed happens nearby. Then for your armor, you want Letta's armor set, as this increases the damage of all dash-based attacks by 10%. This includes any R1 or R2, your light or heavy attack inputs, after a dodge roll, a backstep, while you are crouched, or while sprinting. So this is what we're working around with the sprint heavy. This armor comes quite late in the DLC, honestly pretty unavoidable though, really, so I won't go into too much detail how, just avoid spoiling things, though thankfully due to it being just a sort of cherry on top type of piece for the build, not a requirement, you can still run the rest of the full build long before you get to that point of the DLC. For your other 2 slots then, feel free to use fashion within this, or build up a bit of poise and defense with heavier armor within the confines of our weight limit, but for pure damage based min-max you would want the gauntlets and and Greaves from Rakshasa set for around a 2% damage increase for each of the pieces equipped, so 4% total. This set comes from the Eastern Nameless Mausoleum, downriver from the coffin exit of the Shadow Keep. It's located right here on your map with the path shown from the nearest site of grace. From there, you just want to drop down some gravestones and ride along the river, and after not very long, you will see it in front of you. Then we have our Talismans. For this, you of course want the Lord of Blood's Exaltation Talisman for a 20% boost to all damage for 20 seconds after a bleed occurs nearby, so a second bleed bonus. Then we have the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia for a massive boost to our damage after successive hits, and given the sprint heavy attack does as many hits as it does, this really boosts the damage quite hard, especially if you do get to do a blind spot immediately after the 4 hits from the sprint heavy connect, which then hits super hard. We then have Millicent's Prosthesis, which is a lowered version of the same effect, but with the bonus of giving you 5 dexterity, which lets us have 5 levels to spend elsewhere. If you don't have both of these, you can always run Shard of Alexander instead for a 15% bonus to blind spots damage specifically. In the last slot then, we have a brand new talisman, the Lacerating Crossed Tree. This has the same effect as Letta's armor, boosting the damage of all dash or dodge related attacks, but with a larger bonus of 15%, so another big bonus to our sprint heavies. As for how to get this one then, it is related to a rather dark NPC questline choice that must be done before you have done Messmer. After you progress through the DLC enough to reach the Shadow Altus region, at the High Road Cross site of Grace you will find Letta and Hornsent. Talk to Letta here and it will lead to her thinking she should maybe dispatch one of her less faithful compatriots, and she asks you if you have a suggestion of which one. If you suggest Hornsent, then exhaust his dialogue specifically, and then rest at a Grace anywhere, Hornsent will disappear. Talk to Letta again and she will say that he's gone off to the Black Keep, by which she of course means the Shadow Keep, and the specific place that you want to go now is near the Storehouse first floor site of Grace, back down the elevator that you had to take to come up here, and past this silly little Fire Knight that apparently can't even hear the elevator coming down behind them, and then if you take a very slight left at the end of the pathway here, you will find a pair of summon signs. One of these is to help Hornsent against Letta trying to kill him, the other is to help Letta kill Hornsent. For this talisman, you want to help Letta against Hornsent by interacting with the red summon sign. After the fight is over then, Hornsent will essentially be dead, you will get his weapon and his armor, and then after the fact, if you go and talk to Letta back at the High Road Cross site of Grace, that is when she will give you this talisman. Past that then, we have your Wondrous Flask of Physic, and in this we will be using the, of course, the Thorny Cracked tier from the base game for just more of that multi-hit damage boosting goodness that we are sort of pretty much all built around, and then your second slot is honestly, for the average person, probably going to be the Opaline Hard tier the vast majority of the time. This isn't built to be a one-shot build. You are not expected to have 10-second boss fights, and so while you can use the Bloodsucking Cracked tier for a 20% damage boost, the more average fights that don't just happen to go your way will last long enough with this setup that it will just eat up a lot more health than I am comfortable recommending. That said, if you are comfortable with your boss timings and such, it is a manageable health drain for the Bloodsucking tier, and it is a lot of damage that you get. I just think for most people in most situations, I would recommend the Opaline Hard tier for average use. Moving on then, let's talk about our spells. This is quite simple. You want Golden Vow for 15% increased overall damage and 10% increased damage negation for 80 seconds. You want Flame Grant Me Strength to boost both physical and fire damage, of which we do both, by 20% for 30 seconds. Then you also want Bloodflame Blade. This is how we apply our status buildup. It puts Bloodflame on the weapons, and it scales extremely well with relatively fast and relatively consistent hits. While you can't scale the bleed buildup portion of this with any normal stat scaling options, it is enough to get a bleed in around 5 hits, which is the sprint combo and then a blind spot usage. Then that triggers our bleed damage bonuses, which is the main purpose of the build really. Don't think of this as a bleed build, think of it as a sprint attack build that uses this to proc bleeds regularly enough to make the bleed buffs worth having. And now that you have all the actual bits to put it together, let's talk about the stats that you want on your character to actually make it hit the numbers that I am in this footage at level 150. First up, 60 Vigor. I just wouldn't recommend anything lower than that. Then you want to hit 75 Dexterity. That will bring us up to the soft cap for weapon scaling of 80 once we have Millicent's Prosthesis equipped on top. Then you want 25 Faith and 10 Arcane so you can cast our incantations, and you do need 10 Strength to actually use the weapon, just to mention it. Past that, I recommend getting exactly 12 Mind. This gives you just the right amount of FP that with Radahn's Great Rune activated, you can cast Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, strength and bloodflame blade perfectly before needing to drink a cerulean flask to refill, which lets you just do that combo quite efficiently before entering a boss fight. Any remaining points then should be spent on endurance, really, just to increase your stamina bar, which would then let you use both blind spot and the sprint attacks a bit more frequently. Finally then, let's just talk about how to actually play the build. First, make sure that you apply all of your buffs before walking into a boss room, of course, but then once you are in, your first move sort of depends on what the boss does. The best two openers that you have are either a sprint R2 into their face and then using blind spot to avoid their counterattack, or if they are instead a boss that starts by charging right at your face, you instead want to use blind spot to just immediately dodge it and get in some starting damage, and then just start doing sprint heavies and any openings that you have afterwards. And obviously you can just do normal attacks if you only have smaller openings. They aren't bad. This is a build built around making these weapons strong in the first place. Keeping in mind though that blind spot is also always better than a singular dodge roll is, but any combos with good enough tracking, you should use some dodge rolls just until the last hit. This isn't a build that removes the skill requirement from the game, it just makes it a lot easier to accomplish and really makes you feel strong when you use it correctly. That just about does it for today then, everyone. Just a nice, strong, average use build that doesn't rely on fancy tricks or anything like that. Just a really solid weapon, a really solid Ash of War, and then pushing a part of the moveset to just be ridiculously strong whenever you have the openings to take advantage of it. I hope you've all enjoyed this then, and I hope you enjoy using it for yourself if you try it out too. This one is just especially satisfying in my opinion. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.